We've decided to move. Move? I was confused by the sudden news from Timothy. We've been looking for a while. You know, this house is in a great location, but it's old, right? It's too embarrassing to invite friends over. And with you here, it feels like everyone is walking on eggshells. My eldest son and his wife just say whatever they want. Apparently, they are moving to a luxury apartment. When I asked where they were moving, Laura grinned and said, "We're not telling outsiders our address." It was an annoying way to phrase it. After all, I don't want anything to do with them, but Laura aside, Timothy is my son and George is my husband. When I asked what they meant by outsiders, Timothy started talking smoothly. Dad says he's getting divorced. Divorced? Yeah. Dad's got his eye on some woman. She's nothing special to look at, but she's younger and kinda than you. I knew George and Timothy had been taking advantage of me for household chores, but I had no idea they had insulted me to this extent. My fists clenched in anger. I could feel my blood boiling. I wanted them out immediately. Then I'm fine with the divorce. By the way, George is just a part-time worker. At my words, Laura covered her mouth, and George froze. Don't talk nonsense, old lady. Timothy still didn't seem to grasp the situation. They would soon regret their choices. Even if they cry and apologize, I will never forgive them. My name is Michelle, I'm 54 years old. I've been married to George for nearly 30 years now. George is unreliable and tends to depend on others, but he has a generous spirit and respects what I want to do. That's why I decided to marry him. A few years into our marriage, our eldest son Timothy was born. George was very happy when Timothy was born. Although child rearing was left to me, I hoped that becoming a father might make him a bit more dependable. For a while after giving birth, I harbored that faint hope. But George never changed. Hey, he's crying. Every time Timothy cried, George would call me as if it were someone else's problem. At first, I patiently tried to encourage him. Look, Timothy looks so happy when you hold him. Way to go, Dad. Even if it was just a few times a day, I praised him. I hoped it would help build his confidence as a father. But it didn't work out as I hoped. I'm not cut out for this. You're better at it, Michelle. That's how George pushed all the housework and child rearing onto me. I'm going back to work, can you help out a bit? I can't handle everything on my own. I protested several times, but George would just say as if it were the most natural thing. I trust you with it, Michelle. I'm working too, you know? I'm enduring the hard work. Housework and child rearing should be done by whoever is good at it. George had a way of saying the right things to dodge responsibility. It's not that I was good at it. It was just that by persisting and doing it over and over, I got used to it. Despite trying every trick in the book, George never changed, Timothy grew up, and upon finding a job, he moved out. At that time, the sense of accomplishment outweighed the loneliness. I was relieved that this meant one less person to care for. Thankfully, my career was also progressing smoothly. George still didn't do any housework, but by then, I had become completely accustomed to it. A few years later, despite some troubles at George's work, we were living just the two of us. It was relatively peaceful. Then one day, out of the blue, Timothy announced, "I'm getting married." At the time of his marriage, Timothy was 24 years old. It seemed a bit early, but he was serious about his work, so we were completely in a celebratory mood. The first time Timothy brought Laura to meet us, we were overjoyed. Welcome. We're so happy. We look forward to getting to know you. Yes, thank you. I look forward to it too. Laura was a bright and cheerful girl who spoke clearly. Timothy's workplace and apartment were far from our house, so we wouldn't meet often, but I hoped we could get along well when we did meet. I was the only one getting carried away. What brought me back to reality was Timothy's next statement. We're going to live here together. His tone sounded more like a decision than a consultation, and I was taken aback. Live here? Why? You're newlyweds. What about your jobs? I quit my job. My boss was a jerk. So, I plan to look for something around here. There must be plenty of jobs, right? His carefree attitude made me anxious. Is Laura okay with this? Living with a mother-in-law right after getting married is something I would absolutely hate. And having her husband suddenly unemployed must have been unsettling for her. I asked worriedly, but Laura's calm and unexpected response came back. I'm not good at household chores. This will be a big help. It felt like she had preempted any objections. This was practically a declaration of not doing any housework. I have my own circumstances too. I can't take on everything. For both our sakes, it would be better to reconsider living together. I protested this arrangement to Timothy and Laura numerous times, but they were set on moving in, and so it happened. Living together turned out to be just as I had imagined, in a way. Soon after they moved in, Timothy found a job. The pay wasn't high, but it was close to our house. Soon after, Laura also started working part-time. With both of them securing some income, I felt a bit relieved, but there was a problem. As expected, I ended up doing all the household chores alone. Cooking, laundry, cleaning, shopping, the list was endless. I left the house earliest in the morning and returned the latest. Despite this, no one else seemed willing to lift a finger. Mom, I'm hungry. Isn't dinner ready yet? Timothy would ask while fiddling with his smartphone, and Laura would add while changing the TV channel, indeed. Is today's menu something quick to prepare? Right after I returned home from working overtime, the couple would say such things to me, clearly taking me for granted. I felt like I was being mocked. After all, Laura only works part-time, so she spends more time at home and has more free time than I do. She usually gets home before the evening. She could at least prepare the meals. It was a bit hard to say, but I decided to confront her. George and I will manage on our own. Could you at least prepare your own meals? Then, Laura frowned and looked at me with a puzzled expression. And then she said something unbelievable. Why do I have to do it? For a moment, I was the one taken aback. Why would someone need a reason to prepare their own meal? Confused, I provided the most reasonable explanation I could think of. Well, because you guys get home earlier. Laura didn't seem convinced and glared at me as if trying to intimidate. Even if we come home early, we're tired, you know? Why would you say such a terrible thing to me when I'm just trying to rest? I felt like I was talking to someone from another planet. I wanted to throw her own words right back at her. In fact, I found myself saying it out loud without thinking. But I'm tired too. Laura just scowled and tilted her head, unimpressed. So what? What? Even if you're tired, isn't it a mother's job to push through for her children? Why are you trying to push that responsibility onto me? How absurd. How old is she? I'm not asking her to cook for someone else. I'm asking her to cook for herself and her husband, Timothy. Of course, if Timothy were home earlier, I'd ask him. But Laura is by far the first one back. I had no idea she would refuse to prepare even her and Timothy's meals. Perhaps I've been too lenient. Reflecting on this, I decided to be a bit stricter than before. Afterward, I repeatedly reminded both Laura and Timothy to help with the housework, not just cooking, but they showed no signs of change. If no one else is going to do it, I end up doing it myself, which is a flaw of mine. Maybe it's just my nature, but I can't just sit back and ignore it. Thanks to that, I had to push my no longer young body to manage both work and household chores. If things continue this way, I might collapse one day. I even tried talking to George about it in desperation, but he just said, "It's not my problem. Keep at it," and turned a blind eye. No one changed, and it seemed like I had no choice but to do everything myself. On a day when I was feeling utterly fed up with daily life, I came home from work and noticed that the room seemed a bit tidier. Upon closer inspection, I saw that the clothes and bags that usually littered the floor, belonging to Timothy and Laura, were not there. That was unusual. Had Timothy or Laura picked them up? With a mixture of surprise and joy, I opened the living room door, and there stood Timothy right in front of me. Wow. You scared me. I'm home. Without even a greeting, Timothy casually announced. We've decided to move out. Move out? As I stood there confused, Laura popped her head out, grinning mischievously next to Timothy. The two exchanged meaningful looks and giggled together. It was an unsettling feeling. We've been looking for a while. See, this house has a good location, but it's old, right? It's too embarrassing to invite friends over. Plus, with you around, everyone feels like they have to be on their best behavior. What do you mean by that? After all, they were the ones who moved in without asking, despite my repeated objections. I had objected numerous times to their moving in. Even after they started living with us, they never contributed to the living expenses and completely abandoned any household chores. Now, after having their way all this time, they have the nerve to complain about the house? My stomach churned with anger. I had a lot I wanted to say, but I tried my best to keep my emotions in check. Feel free to move out. In fact, it's something I've been wishing for. However, I won't tolerate you disrespecting this house. You need to apologize. This house is originally my family home. It's filled with memories of my parents. It may be old, but that doesn't give them the right to call it embarrassing. Laura, half smiling as if she found my anger amusing, said, "No way. We're not disrespecting it. We're just stating facts." Wow, you really have a wild imagination. Doesn't it make life difficult for you? I felt like my head was about to explode. Why does she provoke me so? That tone is exactly what I mean by disrespect. Scary. Laura then cooed in a catty voice and hid behind Timothy. When I looked at Timothy, he just sighed with a weary expression. My anger grew even more, but I clenched my teeth and somehow managed to restrain myself. It's because of how you are that we decided to move out. You're always nagging and on edge. This was something I couldn't ignore. Are you saying it's my fault? You always leave everything to others no matter how many times you're told. You never clean up after yourselves. Yet you keep making demands. It's no wonder I'm irritable when that's the way things are. I'm not your housekeeper. But you're a mother, right? A mother is supposed to take care of her children, that's her duty. I remember Laura saying something similar. Do you even realize how old you are? You're adults, yet you act so entitled. I couldn't help but raise my voice. It was unbearable how they claimed their rights as children despite being able to fend for themselves. Whoa, scary. Are you going through menopause or something? Well, whatever. We're moving to a luxury apartment that you couldn't afford in a lifetime. Timothy boasted with a smug look. But something else caught my attention. A luxury apartment, you say? For months, Timothy and Laura hadn't contributed to any expenses. It was possible they had saved that money. However, neither Laura nor Timothy were high earners. It seemed highly unlikely they could afford a luxury apartment in just a few months. Where did you get such money? Eagerly, Timothy responded as if he had been waiting for the question. It's from Dad. George? Yeah. He's going to help us out. The apartment will be for me, Laura, and Dad to live in. I was slow to grasp the unfolding situation, and before I could interject, Timothy continued gleefully. When we asked Dad, he agreed right away. It's too bad after all these years, huh? He prefers his young son and daughter-in-law over an old woman. This was a genuine shock. George and I were nearing our 30th wedding anniversary. I thought we had been getting along well at the beginning of our marriage, but things had gradually become strained after Timothy was born. And lately, we hardly talked. But I never expected that George would leave without saying a word, especially not to live with Timothy and Laura. What are you going to do? Try to stop Dad. Though, I don't think you stand a chance. Watching Timothy's cheerful face and hearing his upbeat tone, something inside me finally snapped. I had endured so much because they were family. Despite the unreasonable demands, I accepted them while voicing my concerns. Perhaps I harbored a hope that they would change if I told them often enough. I was foolish as a parent. This child will never change. And George, as a father, has always pushed everything regarding Timothy onto me. I realized that expecting anything from him was futile. When are you moving out? Actually, we've already moved all our belongings. The new place is fully furnished with new appliances and furniture. It seems they had been planning this without my knowledge. Really? You said it's an apartment, but where are you moving to? The apartment is in the city. Stop. Laura interrupted Timothy, who was about to reveal the location, with a high-pitched voice. No, Tim. Come on. We're going to be strangers to her from now on. After reminding Timothy, Laura turned to me and said bluntly, "We're not telling outsiders our address." What do you mean? I don't want to be involved either, but after all, Timothy is my son and George is my husband. Seeing my puzzled face, Laura showed the biggest smile she had ever given. Why don't you tell her, Tim? Prompted by Laura, Timothy began speaking smoothly. Dad says he's going to divorce you. Divorce? Yeah. Dad's got his eye on some woman. She's nothing special to look at but younger and apparently much nicer than you. He's completely smitten and has been spoiling her. Now that he mentioned it, divorce makes more sense than separation. Especially if there really is another woman involved. I knew I was being used by George and Timothy for chores, but I had no idea I had been so disrespected. My fists clenched, trembling with rage. I could feel the blood rushing to my head. I wanted them to leave immediately. Just as I thought this, the living room door opened and a bewildered George appeared. He seemed to have just come home. What's this heavy atmosphere? What's going on? Looking back and forth between me and Timothy, George listened as Timothy cheerfully responded. Hey, Dad. I was just filling Mom in on everything. When our eyes met, George awkwardly looked away. Unlike Timothy, who was gleefully unaware, George appeared somewhat guilty. Perhaps he felt some guilt towards me after all these years together. Or maybe there was another reason. You're moving out? And I heard you want a divorce? Yeah. Timothy and the others think it's for the best that we get divorced. Oh. I don't have any man in mind though. Well, that's. While he might have been saying whatever he wanted behind my back with Timothy and Laura, facing me directly seemed to change his attitude. His indecisive and overly accommodating nature probably won't ever change. I wanted to say more sarcastic remarks, but there was something more important to do first. Now that it's come to this, before they change their minds, I have to proceed as they plan. Since you're moving out anyway, let's settle the divorce paperwork today. Oh. Well, that's. Right. Let's do it, Dad. Exactly. Let's get this hassle over with quickly. George seemed hesitant, but pushed by Timothy and Laura, we all ended up doing the divorce papers and headed to the county court together. I wanted to go alone, but Timothy said it would be trouble if you just pretended to submit it, so we all went together. The paper in my hand. Submitting this would precede our divorce. While it felt liberating, thinking back on the past 30 years made my emotions complex. George was silent, his expression unreadable. Only Timothy and Laura seemed relieved, almost cheerful. Now we're practically strangers. Thanks for everything up to now. Timothy exclaimed jubilantly, even though we hadn't submitted the papers yet. Even if we divorce, Timothy, you're still my son. Are you saying you want to cut ties completely?
Yeah.
Of course. I can't stand the thought of you coming after us for care or anything later. His blunt words stirred something inside me. No matter how much trouble I might face in the future, I could never depend on you after all the humiliation you've caused. It's outrageous. Finally, when it was time to submit, standing at the after-hours service window, I turned to George one last time. So, I'm going to submit this now. Okay. With George's hesitant attitude, I felt a mix of disdain and irritation as I handed over the divorce papers. The moment I submitted this, we are deciding to be strangers. I took a deep breath and said, as if shaking something off. So, it's a divorce from my part-timer husband. I heard a murmur from Timothy and Laura behind me, but I didn't turn around. At the counter, the clerk briefly checked the divorce papers and accepted them. If there are any issues, they'll contact us later. I think it should be fine though. Well, I have places to be. I was about to leave Timothy, Laura, and George behind when Laura suddenly grabbed my arm. Oh, Michelle. What did you mean earlier? Her face twitched nervously as she spoke. It's understandable. After hearing such things, anyone would have that look. Understanding Laura's feelings, I pretended to be oblivious. Dear, you shouldn't call me like that anymore. We're strangers from now on, aren't we? And what did you mean by earlier? I spoke coldly, and Laura looked at me uncertainly. For once, she seemed unsure of herself, almost seeking confirmation with her expression. It was clear from her look. It was clear she had heard my earlier words without needing to confirm them. She simply couldn't believe it and had come to verify it. They will likely realize their mistake soon and surely regret their decisions. Thinking this brought a slight relief, and a smile naturally spread across my face. You said something about a part-time job. Laura stuttered, and I said with a broad grin. George? Oh, I've kept it a secret, but George has been working part-time at a convenience store. Isn't that commendable? Behind Laura, George's eyes widened, and he froze, while Laura covered her mouth, whispering, "No way." It was a natural reaction. No one would imagine that George, who left home every morning, was only going to a part-time job. In reality, he spent mornings walking or at the employment office and worked from afternoon till evening. Learning this shocking truth, Laura was devastated, and George, realizing everything was out in the open, turned pale. Amidst this, only Timothy was laughing smugly. Don't talk nonsense, old lady. He probably thinks I'm bluffing. With a smug look, he snapped back. Dad working a part-time job? No way. Oh, but it's true. Right, George? Ever since George retired last year, he had been reluctant to work and remained unemployed for a long time. It was only about 6 months ago, after much persuasion from me, that he finally started working part-time. Timothy and Laura moved in afterward, so they were unaware of this. Out of respect for George's pride, we kept it a secret until they noticed. That's, well, yes. What? Really? George nodded, sweating profusely. Seeing his confirmation, it seemed they finally grasped the reality. Timothy and Laura's faces turned pale as they looked down. They should see the reality now and regret their deeds. I can no longer even muster the will to sympathize with them. These are the people who exploited me and looked down upon me, then hurried to cut ties when it suited them. Whether they face turmoil or suffer, it doesn't matter to me anymore. I was about to leave quietly when Timothy called out to stop me. So, how have we been managing the living expenses for 4 people all these months? You're the one asking about living expenses after not contributing anything? I was so appalled that words failed me at first. Struggling to get the words out, I finally said. I was the one earning the money. Timothy blinked in disbelief. What? That's impossible. How could you support a household of 4? That's not something you could do. You know I've been working from morning till night, right? So why do you think it's impossible? But, Mom, you're a woman. Even if you were a full-time employee, the income would be limited, right? You earn that much? Yes. Since becoming an executive, I've been receiving a substantial executive compensation. Executive? Timothy's eyes darted back and forth, clearly struggling to accept the revelation. They likely can't believe that someone they looked down upon was actually an executive. The father they relied on turned out to be just a part-timer, and the mother they discarded was actually the high earner. You should have told us. Did Dad not know either? Yes. You and your father have a tendency to depend on others too quickly. That's why I didn't tell you. I see. But now we're relieved. Relieved about what? Timothy patted my shoulder, smiling. Dad can go back to his old house, and you can come live in our apartment. What? What a convenient arrangement. Abandon George when they think he's penniless, and try to latch on to me when they find out I have money. Thinking this was the child I raised fills me with dismay and anger. How could you think that's possible? I already confirmed with you, didn't I? We're strangers from now on, right? That is. But then, who's going to pay? It's not just the apartment. We bought all the appliances and furniture on credit. Timothy looked at me pleadingly, his voice trembling. How long do you plan to remain a child? You need to clean up your own mess. If you put your mind to it, anything's possible. For example, if Laura worked more, that alone would increase your income. Glancing sideways, I saw Laura flinch, her shoulders trembling. Her face was pale as a ghost. That's... Timothy collapsed to his knees. Finally realizing the gravity of their situation. Next to him, Laura crouched down too, but then, as if struck by a sudden thought, she said, "That's it. The deposit." Her eyes sparkled as she spoke to Timothy. "Your father retired just a few months ago, right? Then, he must have some savings." Timothy's face lit up at her words. "Exactly. With Dad's years of service, he must have a decent amount." Right. If they get divorced, all that money would belong to your father, right? That's great. I'm so relieved. Of course. It's Dad's, it's ours. Timothy and Laura gleefully celebrated their newfound solution. Do they think the world revolves around them? Even before marriage, that might be one thing, but income earned after marriage is considered marital property and subject to division. Probably. What? What are you talking about? It's Dad's money. Really, how awful. How much of a money grubber can you be? You're already divorcing, right? We're strangers. And yet you talk about sharing and taking money, that's just wrong. Timothy and Laura were furious, unable to accept the reality. They're quick to dismiss their own faults while freely criticizing others. My patience with them was wearing thin. I took a deep breath to calm myself and stated firmly. First of all, there's hardly any savings left. What? Why? George only worked at his last company for a few years, so the savings wasn't much to begin with. George frequently changed jobs. Whether it was because the work was too demanding or due to poor relationships with colleagues, the reasons varied, but essentially, he never stayed long at any job. Like father, like son. Damn. What about other savings? Your savings, Mom. Those should be part of the property division, right? Whatever was left has significantly diminished over these past few months with you two eating for free here. So, it looks like Dad is pretty much broke. It seems so. Timothy and Laura looked at each other, trembling, and then Timothy suddenly grabbed George by the shirt front. It's your fault. How dare you deceive us? What are we supposed to do now? You have no money, and you are going to live with us. George brushed off Timothy's hand. Shut up. You were the ones who invited me. Let's live together. Let's have a luxurious life in the apartment. I just agreed to it. Who wants to live with a broke old man? Oh, what are we supposed to do about the apartment payments now? An ugly fight had erupted right in front of me, with the father and son at each other's throats. It seems like the misunderstandings arose because they both relied too heavily on each other's money. That's ridiculously absurd. Well, it has nothing to do with me. I'll contact you through a lawyer again. As I waved dismissively, Laura frantically approached me with a desperate look. You can't be serious. Are you just going to leave it like this? That's your ex-husband and son. I've told you multiple times. We are strangers from now. But besides, you were the ones who said it first, right? That I'm an outsider. Don't worry. I don't even care about the address anymore. We're strangers, after all. I thought I heard Laura shout wait, but I dismissed it as my imagination and walked away. Later, Timothy and Laura couldn't afford the condo fees and had to move to a cheaper apartment soon after. The move was not only a waste of money, but it seems the furniture and appliances were quite expensive. And now they are struggling to make the monthly payments. Laura also increased her part-time work, but it was nowhere near enough, and she's even considering working at a nightclub. Also, the couple has been constantly fighting since then, so a divorce seems likely. As for George, the young woman he was targeting quickly married another man. Even after all I've done for her, he confronted her, which ended up with the police being called and a huge fuss being made. Having learned his lesson, he became quite depressed and even reached out to me asking to get back together. You're the only one who really gets me, Michelle. He was being self-indulgent. So I simply replied, I don't want to understand you, and blocked his number. It's fine for him to indulge in self-pity, but I'd rather he didn't involve me. The main reason I married George was that he let me be free. But, looking back over 30 years, I was never truly free. He was only fine as long as he wasn't disadvantaged. That's why he was so adamant about refusing when it looked like he might get involved in troublesome situations. Child rearing was one of them. He probably hated having his routine disrupted. There is one thing I am grateful to George and Timothy for. Because of them, I endured a lot of inconvenient and constricting times. Thanks to that, now that I'm alone, I feel incredibly liberated and free. I never want to see them again, but I'm proud of how hard I worked back then, and I believe I've grown from it. From now on, I plan to take care of myself and live as I please for the remainder of my life, without being a burden to anyone.